Um, at a very young age, I was diagnosed with, back then it was just considered hyperactivity, put on the Ritalin and all that fun stuff. By the time I was 10, I was seeing people and things that were not real, that were chasing me, that was trying to attack me and my family. I was put in a psychiatric hospital for 2 years. Uh, they back then did not like to diagnose children with bipolar or schizophrenia, so instead they just doped me up on a lot of psych meds where I felt nothing. I had no emotions, no feelings, no thoughts. I was just automatic, instinctual living. Pregnancy and no medication and stuff just really sent me out of control. Seeing things, hearing things again. At one point, I was shooting at FBI, CIA, and ATF that was not there. Um, Police came in, pulled me out, and of course brought me to jail because unauthorized use of a firearm. I was then diagnosed bipolar, schizophrenic tendencies, and again doped to the gills. I was in and out of psych hospitals, and I was just really tired of the medications they had me on because I was not human. I was nothing. Um, Figured I knew best. I started shooting up meth and heroin, and I had this false sense of well-being. I was just happy, and it was a lot cheaper than the psych meds. I signed my kids over to my mom, left my husband, ended up on the streets. I was out there for about 10 years. Uh, One day I realized that my dope dealer was driving a brand new Lexus that I paid for. And I think it was more of a prideful thing at that point. I'm like, no more. I had a $500 a day habit. And so I did some pretty awful things to get that $500 a day. Still struggled a lot. I wasn't using drugs anymore, but I just replaced it with alcohol. Alcohol seemed to be the thing. I met someone. I fell in love and didn't even know it until he left because I was incapable of showing emotions. And when he left, I felt shattered. My spirit was just shattered. Everything in me. I I just I knew that at that point something very big was missing. And I was raised in a Pentecostal church. I was taught the word growing up. Didn't really care about it because I had no feelings. I knew that there was no way I could continue on my own with my own choices because I had just made a big mess out of my life. I was in my bedroom at the corner of my bed and I hit my knees and I was so hurt and angry. I'm like, is this what you want? This is what you want of me? You give me these emotions and this is what I get? This is what you want? And I just had this overwhelming, I didn't hear voices, but I had this overwhelming thought process of, now I can make it better. That's all he wanted was for me to surrender. And I had never been able to do that with anyone, ever. I mean, couldn't connect. I sat there praying what ended up being an hour and a half. I found out later. And I contacted a friend of mine on Facebook, and I told her, I said, I can't do this anymore. I need the Lord back in my life. When I got up from praying, I had this overwhelming, calm peace that I had never in my entire life experienced, ever. So a lot of people that knew me growing up, they knew me as just a survival instinct person. If I was in danger, I fought. If I felt like I was in danger, I fought. How it should be said. So they knew me as kind of violent too. And so whenever I speak to them, they're just like, wasn't really sure. Because this is the same person that was hearing voices that had a gun shooting at people that were not there. Fighting people, went to prison, had spent some time in prison. And look at her. She's talking to us about God. She's telling us about Jesus. And my brother, I think, is probably one of the biggest skeptics because I've heard him the most. And last weekend, I saw my brother, and I told my brother, I said, one day you're going to come to church with me, and you're going to feel the feelings that I feel. You're going to know, without a doubt, that you are being guided by the Spirit, and that Jesus is with you, and that He loves you, no matter what you've done. I said, I've used drugs. I've hurt a lot of people. I've lied. I've cheated. I've stolen. I shot up drugs using ditch water because I had no other water. I did not feel like I was worthy enough to even live, much less be saved. But whenever I was shattered in pieces and I called out to Jesus, He was there. And whenever the Bible tells us He will give us a new mind and a new heart, that is the truth. Because the mind I had before Him was not a good one. The heart I had before Him was not a good one. I had no way to empathize with people, no way to connect with them, no way to even think about their struggles or think about helping them. And now I see someone and I feel like I need to reach out to them. I want them to feel the love I feel. I want to share that love with them. I want to bring them to where I'm at, where I'm continuing to go. I want them to stand up and sing, even though they can't hear and they're off tune. I want them to sing it loud and be happy. I want them to feel the Spirit working in their lives and giving them thoughts and feelings that they did not think was available to them. I am brand new. So, with that being said, any opportunity I get, any chance I get, I'm going to speak about my God. And I'm going to tell them everything that I know and my understanding. If I don't understand it, hey, come to my church. My pastoral team is awesome. They can answer your questions. So I am just so grateful. Do not believe the voices in your head that is telling you that you're not worthy and that you're unlovable and you're untouchable and you're unspeakable, because you are worthy. You are loved, and He has not left your side. You left Him. He just wants you to come back.
Teresa McCartney Hoffert, Hoffart.
Tell me your story.
So I am an ex-drug addict. One of the biggest part of my testimony. At 8 years old, everybody around me was smoking weed, right? I was the youngest, from cousins, siblings, everywhere. And I would look around, and when they would smoke weed, they would be happy, right? Well, we lived in a home that was far from happy. We would have no lights, no gas, no water, no food at the same time. And so seeing them have joy, I was like, oh, I want that. So at 8 years old, I started smoking weed. And then by the time I was 12, I started doing LSD, acid. I started drinking alcohol, started doing crystal meth, and started having sex. Because here I was with that mindset of believing the lie, of going, there's a Prince Charming somewhere out there that I'm going to be able to find, and he's going to be able to rescue me from all of this that I live in. That was so not true. At age 16, I had a really, 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 really bad acid trip. And I didn't serve God, of course. I was an addict. And so I hit my knees and I said, God, if you take this away from me, I'll never do acid again. That quick. Gone. Nothing else. And so for many years, I quit doing drugs. Like, I wouldn't smoke any weed. I wouldn't do anything. I was like, no, Well, then my first two children were stolen from me. And I became the biggest addict that anybody probably ever seen after that. Paul and I got together. I was right after 30, right about 30 years old, we got together. And I was still an addict and I was still an alcoholic. And him and I were actually supposed to be a one night stand. Like all I knew was sex, alcohol, drugs, anything that looked nothing like Jesus, right? Well, on November the 8th of 2007, my family got a phone call that I'd overdosed and died. And for 2.5 hours, they thought that was the truth. I had the ringer off on my cell phone. I was at another man's house. And when I woke up, I looked at my phone. There was 48 missed calls and 27 voicemails. And all of them said, call your dad, call your dad. So I'm thinking something's wrong with my dad. They picked me up, and that's when he tells me that a girl named Teresa, mind you, my name is Teresa, a girl named Teresa overdosed from taking too many pills. Anybody that knows me knows I can't stand pills. Later on throughout the evening, I found out my dad almost had a heart attack from everything because his blood pressure skyrocketed so much. I was 32. The next morning, we have a friend of mine that's staying in the house. She is a felon, just got out of prison. She's, paroled to our house. And she had her Bible sitting in the living room. It was a blue Bible. I'll never forget it. And I woke up and I'm sitting in the chair and I'm drinking my coffee. And I grabbed that Bible and I said, God, I love cocaine, but I love my daddy more. And for the very first time in my entire life, I heard God's audible voice, like if he was sitting here like you and I. And he said, when are you going to love yourself? And I fell out of that chair and I started bawling. And I said, I don't know how. I had no idea. And immediately the drug and alcohol was gone. The being with other women because men raped me and beat me and all these things. And so I believed a lie for a long time that a woman would treat me better. He took all of that, like all of that. I still had struggles, don't get me wrong. I still had stuff I was going through, but every day for 6 months, I looked in the mirror and said, Teresa Ann McCartney, I love you. And it took 6 months to become real. And then about 10 years after serving the Lord, because I kept hearing everybody talk about this loving father, right? And that was like, what do you mean? I wasn't raised with a loving father. Praise God, my dad's nothing like he was when I was growing up, but I couldn't get that into my heart, my spirit, my mind, or anything about a loving father. And I remember God does so much in the living room. You know what I mean? It's crazy. But I'm sitting there and I'm just at the feet of Jesus. And I said, God, everybody talks about this love. 10 years. I was serving him 10 years. And I said, everybody talks about this love, but I don't know what that feels like. I don't know what that looks like. I don't know anything about it. And all of a sudden, I don't know how to explain it, but it was like thick as honey was his love that just poured in me, on me, around me, every aspect of me. And I literally ran to the shower and I was scraping myself and washing myself so much I was bleeding. And because I told him, how could someone so pure love someone so dirty like me? And that's when my true walk started. It wasn't November the 9th of 2007. It was that day in the living room that his love overtook me and showed me that even in everything that I've ever done, good, bad, or in between, that he was right there, that he was my Abba Father, and that he loved me even in the times that I didn't know how to love myself. And so through the years of serving the Lord, it's been like the best and worst roller coaster ride ever. It's like a roller coaster ride that you didn't even pay to get on, but you're on it and you just can't seem to get off, right? But at the end of the day, he's faithful. Even when we're not, even when we don't understand what's going on, even when we don't know what our next step looks like. And that's like on a daily basis, right? He is still there, and he is my best friend. You never have to believe the lie. Because I believed the lie that I wasn't worthy of love. I believed the lie that I wasn't good enough for anything, anyone, that I was stupid, that I was things that I don't say anymore and definitely can't be on this broadcast, but don't believe the lie. I got saved November the 9th, 2007, February of 2008. I started having panic attacks. I couldn't leave my home for over a year. I was a prisoner. And little by little, like this is a miracle, being this far away from my home. And a lot of people have no idea. Still got some stuff to work through, but I'm going to get there.
Yeah. Praise God.
Amen.
Well, of course, Thomas Walker is my name. I was born and raised in Tucson, Arizona. My mother and dad took us all and moved down the street, so we were all in the same neighborhood. I spent a lot of time at my grandma's. I was the baby, so she kind of kept me close. But I would spend a lot of time with my older brothers and sisters as I got older. When I was 10, when I was 10 years old, my dad would kind of be in and out. He would be in and out of the house. And he would sometimes leave and he'd say, tell my mom I'd be back in a little while. And it may be 2 hours. Then it would 2 days. Next thing you know, it may be the weekend. Well, this one particular day, I was up in the community park and I was swinging back and forth. A friend of mine ran up to the park. I'm 10 years old. He runs to the park and he says, Tommy Lee, you need to go home. Your dad is beating up your mom. And I jumped out of the swing and I ran home. When I got in front of the house, there was an ambulance in front of the house. It was white, the big red stripes around it, and the doors were open. My mom was in the back of that ambulance on a stretcher. And I remember seeing her face swollen. She had an oxygen mask on and blood running down the front of it. And I stood there paralyzed. I said, so what happened next? And she said, well, you were always down to Mama Lucy, which was my dear grandmother. And she said, you were down there. I came down there and started living down there with her. And the rest of the family, they were older teens at that point, and everybody scattered. So I'm at grandma's, and Mama Lucy was a good old Pentecostal mother of the church, and she used to take me to church with her. Nobody else, just me and her. But she took me to church, this little Pentecostal church where I would see miracles happen, and I'd be down in this little cold basement. But she did. I said she put me on drugs. She drugged me to church on Sunday. She drugged me to prayer meetings. She drugged me to revivals. And but I was her project, and I thank God for her even now because she introduced me to the things of God. Well, family's broken up. Mother's gone. Dad is somewhere. So I come home from school 2 years later. I walk into the house, my grandmother's house. By that time, she's bedridden, and she's in the back of the house, and she would hear me come through the door. Well, this particular day, I walked in the door, and the television was on in the living room, and it said, the news report said, Southside man kills woman in boarding house. News at 5. And I looked at the television, and they were bringing my dad out. He had just killed his mistress. He had shot her, killed her. And I looked at the TV, and I thought, oh, my God. Nobody in the family ever talked about it. I didn't go to church anymore. After my grandmother became bedridden, I didn't continue in church. The siblings were all scattered. I went on into high school at that point. And To this day, I don't know who signed me in or who signed me out of anything. I just learned to manage. I was resilient, able to just keep going. So I get into high school, and of course, I was a 14-year-old boy, so I got myself a girlfriend, and I found myself leaning on her a lot. But I also found myself carrying out the traits of my father. I had my head on the desk, and I raised my head up, and the teacher says, uh, told me to stop talking, and I wasn't. And I said some things to her that I should not have said. And she sent me to the dean's office. I get up to go to the dean, and when I left the classroom, I didn't go to the dean. I walked home. And had grandma been there, I would never have done that. I went back to school the next day, and I got kicked out of school. Matter of fact, I had gotten kicked out of the district, and I had never been in trouble in school before. But part of that journey with my older brothers and sisters, particularly my older brothers, they were pretty rough characters for the most part, and so a lot of that was rolling downhill, I believe. Now that I look back on it, and I believe it stemmed from the stigma of my dad and that murderous situation he was in, and the way he treated my mom. I felt like when he killed that lady, the community killed us. And so I've always carried this thing of not being good enough or always have to measure up to something that I maybe was or was not. Well, I ended up going to another high school. Between my junior and senior year in high school, I got my girlfriend pregnant. Now I'm going into my junior year, my senior year, and I've got a baby. Made the football team. Once they found out about the baby, I walked in the locker room one day after for practice, and they cleaned out my locker, and nobody ever said a word to me. Uh, I walked out that day, and I never went back to school, and that was in the first semester of my senior year. My granddad made me get a job to take care of my son, and I ended up finishing night school. And after about 5 or 10 years in this thing, I was still trying to straddle the fence. My feet in the world, feet in the church. I was still trying to do both. And I joined this church, and I met four young men who I'd never seen anything like these guys before. They were committed to the Word of God. They were committed to discipleship, and they were sold out for the things of God. These guys brought me under their wings, and they began to disciple me. And I'd been in church probably 10 years by then, but I didn't know the deeper things of God. And these guys began to disciple me. I started teaching youth Sunday school, and I literally fell in love with it. Um, After teaching for a while, I used to hang out with the youth pastor, go on youth trips, and I became so connected to it. I felt this passion to continue to serve youth. I moved. I moved into a youth ministry position, and this was interesting how it happened. The church that I was at was looking for a youth pastor. The guy we had got called to a church, so I was on the interviewing committee. And everyone that we interviewed would tell the senior pastor, "I don't know why you're looking for a youth pastor. You already have one." And he asked me if I wanted that position, and I thought, well, sure. Well, it was part time. I was working my industrial sales job, and I absolutely loved it. About 3 years in, I end up had to make a decision whether I was going to be bivocational or whether I was going to just let that go. Well, I ultimately ended up leaving that church. There was some scandals going on, so I left that church. I kept my job, but then I saw a position in a United Methodist church. I applied for that youth ministry position. A year later, they brought me on full time, and I left my industrial sales career. I was 38 years old when I did that. I spent 10 years doing that in the Methodist church, and from the discipleship of these young men, it connected me from things of God that I just never thought I could be there. But I was so engaged in youth ministry. I was so engaged in that work that that's all I wanted to do. So I stayed at this church 10 years. I got my ordination from the Methodist Church at this point. Well, when you do that, you're up to itinerate. They moved me from a suburban church to an inner city church in an area called Third Ward, Houston. And I was between an elementary and a middle school. And I was so connected that to those schools. I'll never forget the middle school pastor told me, he said, I've been here for 8 years and not one pastor in the community has come to visit. But we literally transformed the community through those ministries. And what that did for me is it connected me to urban ministry. And they moved me to another church after 8 years. I stayed there about 2 years. And I recognized that senior pastoring just wasn't my call. My call was to youth ministry. I resigned. I went back to the industry for 2 years and then I retired. Well, it just so happens that I ran into one of the students that was in the youth ministry from years ago, is now the principal at a high school in inner city Houston. I'm volunteering there now with him, and I'm ministering to high school students. I started writing this book, and what I realized is what I'm doing now is has a direct connection to what I was doing. To my growing up. Because in that season of middle school and high school, there was no adult at that point. Grandmother was ill and had ultimately passed. My mom was gone and so was my dad. And what I'm doing now with middle school and high school students is a direct result of my upbringing. And I recognize now, and even more today, that God had a plan all along. Trust God. Give your life to God and learn to hear his voice and not your own.